His voice cut through the ballroom like a blade. "I'm the one who reported you." The chandelier light caught his satisfied smile as two officers pulled my arms behind my back. Metal cuffs bit into my wrists. Around me, 300 guests stared at my medals. My uniform, my face searching for the crack where treason might have seeped in. My father leaned back in his chair, glass raised, savoring his own performance. But none of them knew what was about to walk through those doors. "You're under arrest for treason." The words stopped the string quartet mid-phrase. Silverware froze above plates of prime rib. The ballroom held its breath as two officers pushed through the sea of gowns and dress uniforms. Their hands closed around my arms with rehearsed precision. The metal cuffs were cold, colder than the air conditioning that suddenly seemed to hum louder in the silence. I stood there in full dress whites. My medals caught the light. Salutes rose halfway around the room and then fell, abandoned. Whispers raced from table to table like wildfire. In the front row, my father sat with the posture of a man admiring his own work. His lips curved in a smile I had seen before, the one he wore when he believed he had finally won. "I'm the one who reported you," he announced, his voice carrying across the room with deliberate volume. The room released a wounded sound, a collective gasp that seemed to pull the oxygen from the air. Treason. The ugliest word you can attach to an American uniform. Even a decorated one. Even one worn by a 4-star admiral. An officer read from a folded sheet of paper, his voice suddenly official and distant, as if reciting lines in a play he had not auditioned for. Suspicion of unlawful transfer of classified material. Misuse of federal systems. A complaint lodged by a citizen witness. I barely listened. The words were props. The accusation was theatre. But I felt every eye on my shoulder boards, on the ribbon racks that documented 25 years of service, on the small scar beneath my ear that never quite disappears under makeup. They stared as if searching for evidence, for some visible crack through which guilt might seep. Cameras rose like a tide. Someone muttered, "Her father." Another whispered, "My God." A retired chief I had served with 20 years ago started to stand. His wife caught his sleeve and pulled him back down, shaking her head. The wisdom of staying out of a spectacle you cannot control. I kept my chin level. My hands remained still. My breathing stayed slow and measured. There are worse places to be than under a brutal spotlight. I have been pinned to the earth by the cyclone roar of a landing helicopter, pressed flat against a wave-slicked deck while shrapnel cut the night like glass. I have held a mother's letter in gloved hands because her son could not hold it himself. The quartet had stopped playing. The hum of the heating and cooling system felt suddenly loud, a steady mechanical wind against the flags on the stage. The podium where I was meant to accept an award still gleamed, its polished brass seal reflecting a room that was now fracturing before my eyes. A server stumbled on nothing and caught herself. A politician near me shifted his chair so the seat back formed a shield between us. No one spoke my name. No one said Admiral. The word had been stripped from me in an instant. The officers turned me toward the side aisle, toward the wide double doors that had welcomed so many grand entrances. My heels clicked evenly on the marble floor. I did not resist. I did not plead. I did not look for sympathy in the faces that turned away. I have learned over years and oceans that silence can carry more authority than any speech ever written. Behind that silence, my thoughts arranged themselves with the precision that has kept people alive in impossible situations. The complaint had come from him. He said so himself, made sure everyone heard. That fit the pattern I had been watching unfold for years, the jabs that began the day I signed my commission. The first Christmas leave when he stood me beside the tree like a misbehaving child and called my uniform a costume. The year I made flag rank. And he sent congratulatory flowers to my brother instead. Envy shrinks a man from the inside. Resentment hollows him out until there is nothing left but the echo of what he used to be. Tonight he wanted spectacle, and he had found it. He wanted me small, diminished under his shadow. He thought he had finally discovered the switch that would dim my light. He has never understood where that light comes from. "Admiral, ma'am," one officer said quietly, almost apologetically. We had paused near the aisle to let a table of donors push back their chairs and clear a path. His partner kept his grip firm on my arm but avoided my eyes. They had been told to do something that did not fit easily in their bodies, in their sense of what was right. I did not blame them. Orders can be a blindfold. I gave a small nod and let them guide me forward. A woman near the aisle held a napkin pressed to her mouth. Her eyes were too bright, brimming with tears she was trying to control. I recognized her from a Veterans Hospital fundraiser years ago. She had pressed a photograph into my hand, a picture of her son who had come home different, changed by what he had seen and done. "Is it true?" she whispered, as if treason was something contagious, something that might spread through proximity. The napkin trembled in her hands. I looked at her directly and said nothing. Not because I could not speak, but because one word from me would become 1,000 words from everyone else, twisted and reshaped until the truth was buried beneath speculation. Across the room, my father raised his glass to no one in particular. He took a slow drink, savouring something aged and expensive. He has always liked the taste of his own certainty, the flavour of being right when no one can prove him wrong. The double doors were 30 feet away when I felt it, the faintest tremor underfoot. Not an earthquake, not the clatter of serving trays from the kitchen. A rhythm, boots somewhere beyond the corridor moving with purpose. Not hurried but measured. A sound I know the way a farmer knows rain by smell, the way a mother knows her child's footstep on the stairs. The officers escorting me did not notice. The crowd did not hear it yet. The chandeliers held their breath. A part of me wanted to smile. Another part, the part that has learned to stay 3 moves ahead in every situation, counselled patience. Let this scene play to the end of its act. The next act was already written and rehearsed elsewhere by people who understand the difference between performance and truth. I have tried more times than I can count to explain to myself the precise hour when a father turns from critic to enemy. It does not happen all at once. It accumulates like silt in the bends of a river, layer upon layer, until the water cannot flow cleanly anymore. Until everything becomes choked and stagnant. He loved to tell the story, at least his version of it. A teenage daughter who argued too well, who beat the boys at calculus, who threw a baseball farther than the coach's son. He softened it when he had an audience, framing it as fatherly pride laced with gentle concern. In private, he made it a grievance, a list of ways I had embarrassed him by being more than he expected. When my first command letter arrived, official and embossed, he folded it once and slid it across the kitchen table as if returning a bill that was not his responsibility. "This," he said, tapping the seal with his finger, "is where you forget who you are." I did not forget. I learned to be more than what he could carry, more than he could claim, more than he could control. We passed the table that had been mine. My untouched place card lay face down beside the bread plate. I had picked that seat carefully. From there, positioned between 2 flags, you could see the stage head-on without the glare of the center chandelier making your eyes water. I had planned to stand later in the evening and thank the people whose names never make the printed program. The sailors who never stand in front of microphones but always stand in front of danger. The medics who save lives in conditions that would break most people. I had planned to point to the long line of names stitched into the fabric of memory, names of those who cannot wear medals anymore because they paid the ultimate price. I had planned to say, in words I had revised all afternoon, that honor is not a piece of metal pinned under a spotlight. Honor is a long, disciplined quiet that survives beyond applause, beyond recognition, beyond the moment when everyone stops watching. The paper with those words was still in my clutch. One of the officers, meaning to be careful as he adjusted his grip, brushed against it. The paper slid from my hand and disappeared under the table, lost among the shoes and dropped napkins. When we reached the doors, my father's voice followed us like a fishing hook snagging flesh. "Look at her," he said, his tone almost tender, speaking to whoever would grant him their attention. Even now she thinks she's above the law. He has always confused stillness with contempt. He mistakes quietness for a sense of superiority. He cannot read a blank expression as discipline. He cannot fathom that restraint is not the same as fear. I did not turn. I did not give him the theatre of my reaction, the satisfaction of seeing my face. Beyond the doors, the rhythm I had felt became clearer, more distinct. A cadence carried by the floor itself, transmitted through marble and foundation. The officers tightened their hands on my arms, not because they sensed what I was sensing, but because the crowd was pressing closer now, cell phones raised high, flashes popping like small explosions of light. Time narrowed to a bright corridor of awareness. I tell you this not to persuade you, but to record the truth. Humiliation is not the same as defeat. Humiliation is heat. It can melt you into shapelessness if you allow it, or it can temper you into something stronger. something that cannot be broken by shame alone. I remembered a desert night years ago. We had waited for dawn behind a low concrete wall, sand crawling into every seam of our gear. The world was quiet except for the distant rattle of a generator and a dog that barked once and then reconsidered. I remembered the weight of a satellite phone in my hand, a single sentence that changed an entire mission profile. I remembered the exact color the sky turns 2 minutes before first light. That moment when the world chooses itself again, when darkness surrenders to day. Tonight, the sky was plaster and crystal and recycled indoor air. But it would choose again all the same. The law is not a rumor. Truth is not a suggestion. Both have weight, both have teeth. The right-hand door swung inward on its brass hinge before we reached it. The officers halted, surprised. The crowd's rising whisper crashed into sudden silence, as if someone had unplugged the entire stadium of noise. Boots crossed the threshold in a line. Steady. Commanding. The sound of discipline made visible and audible. My father's glass stopped halfway to his mouth, frozen in the air. I did not need to look to recognize the posture, the faces, the resolve. I kept my chin level and my breathing even. If you were there, if you stood with your napkin trembling or your phone held high, you would say the temperature changed. You would say the air became a different substance entirely. You would be absolutely right. He had no idea who I really was. None of them did. I was not born into uniforms and medals. I was born in a town that smelled like cut hay in June and hot asphalt in August. A place where Friday nights meant high school football, Sunday mornings meant church, and every conversation at the diner eventually circled back to what your father did for a living. Mine ran a small construction business and maintained a larger reputation. He shook hands the way some men swing hammers. Hard, fast, showing you the veins in his forearm and daring you to flinch. The first story anyone told about me was not about my first word or the teeth I lost falling on the porch steps. It was about the little league afternoon when I threw a baseball farther than the coach's son. My father laughed, but the sound came a half-second too late. "Atta girl," he said, his voice thick, his smile like a shirt ironed wrong, all the creases in the wrong places. When the coach's wife said, "She's really something," my father replied, "for a girl. If you had been there, you would have thought it was nothing." A shrug. A joke. That is how it starts. Sand grains of dismissal gathering slowly into dunes. School came easily to me. I liked the way numbers locked into place with a satisfying click you could feel in your teeth. I liked history even more. The fixed stars of names and dates, the constellations of cause and consequence. The way our country keeps trying, generation after generation, to correct itself in public view. I wrote an essay on the Battle of Midway and another on the Tuskegee Airmen. My teacher, Mrs. Klein, pressed the corner of my paper to her cheek as if the words themselves were warm. "You have a gift," she said. "You have potential. You have a duty," my father countered at dinner that night, tapping his fork against his plate with sharp clicks. A duty to practical things, to what actually pays the bills. When a military recruiter visited our high school with a slideshow of the Naval Academy, I felt something shift inside me. The images of stone buildings, the river, the grey-blue mornings. It was like a compass that had been spinning wildly, suddenly settling back to true north, pointing to a direction I had not known existed. I brought the brochure home. My father read it as if the glossy pages were a trespass warrant, evidence of a crime I was planning to commit. "They'll eat you alive," he said flatly. "You'll cry and crawl home, and I'll have to explain you to the neighbours. I'll have to tell them my daughter couldn't handle it." My mother, quieter and kinder in all things, said gently, "She won't cry." She placed the brochure under a refrigerator magnet shaped like a lighthouse, as if to say there is a beam of light for you. Look toward it. Fathers are supposed to bless their children's choices or refuse them outright. Mine bargained. "Go to State College," he said, meaning the nearest public university 30 miles down the highway. "Study accounting or nursing. Something sensible. You'll thank me later." He did not like the Academy's application process. He did not like the medical forms, the nomination letters from our congressman, the way the congressman's aide looked directly at me when asking questions instead of deferring to him. "She's 17, my father barked, as if that number were a shield against reality. "So were you once," the aide replied calmly. My father did not enjoy being reminded of his own youth. He sulked through the entire spring. When the appointment letter arrived, thick envelope with an embossed seal you could feel with your thumb, I took it out to the porch to open it alone. The evening smelled like cut grass and the sweet metallic odor of the charcoal grill. He watched me read the words through the screen door. He did not ask to hold the paper. He did not congratulate me. He said, "Don't get smart with us when you come crawling back." As if intelligence were a form of insolence. As if leaving were an act of war against him personally. I did not come back the way he meant. The academy taught me how to absorb a command without taking it personally. How to breathe when your chest feels like it wants to collapse. How to stitch your own frayed edges back together before anyone else notices the damage. The first time I returned home in my white uniform, our pastor shook my hand and gripped my forearm with his other hand. The way men do when they truly mean their respect. The VFW post commander gave me a nod that was worth more than any applause. My father introduced me to people not by my name, but as this one. He would gesture vaguely in my direction and add, "She's got ideas." The men in the room laughed. Even the kind ones, because laughter is oil on old gears. It makes things move that should not be moving. Later, in our kitchen with just the two of us, he pointed to my shoulder boards and said, "Do they make those in men's sizes?" The joke sat between us like something dead. I learned to step carefully around it. When you begin to excel in a small town, people keep score. Mrs. Klein sent letters to the editor about our hometown hero, and I folded them carefully into my footlocker alongside spare socks and pressed uniforms. I learned to read navigation charts and ocean currents. I learned the austere mercy of checklists, the way they keep you alive when emotion would get you killed. I learned the crucial distinction between fear and panic, the same way you learn the difference between weather and climate, by standing in both long enough to understand their patterns. Each promotion came with a phone call home. Mine were brief. His were briefer. "Don't get a big head," he said when I made lieutenant. "Paper ranks," he muttered when I made commander, as if the rank itself were not real, not earned through years of competence and sacrifice. When I pinned on Admiral stars, he did not answer the phone. He sent a text message, a single thumbs-up emoji. His first and last emoji. That told me everything I needed to know about where we stood. You might ask why I kept trying, why I kept reaching out to a man who refused to reach back. The answer is complicated and simple at the same time. Because duty runs forward as well as upward. Because there were younger women watching my example. Women who needed to see that you could survive this kind of rejection and still serve with honor. Because the work itself mattered to sailors whose hands remember the weight of mooring lines at 2 a.m, to families waiting through their 3rd deployment, to names engraved on memorials that never gather dust because we will not allow it. Because service teaches you a long patience, and long patience allows you to outlast 1,000 small doubts, 1,000 tiny cuts. Because even when I stopped expecting my father's blessing, some stubborn part of me believed he might stumble into pride by accident. That one day, without planning it, he might feel genuine pride in what I had accomplished. One Thanksgiving between deployments, we drove past the river that lifts a thin grey mist at dusk. The kind of mist that makes even industrial smokestacks look beautiful and mysterious. Inside the house, a football game babbled from the television. My brother-in-law argued with a nephew about the proper way to carve the turkey. My father seized the carving knife just to demonstrate to the room that he was still in charge. When I reached for the serving platter, he said loudly, "Careful, Admiral. Wouldn't want you to violate the turkey's chain of command." The room erupted in laughter. My mother gave me that look she had worn too often over the years. Apologies stitched directly onto love. I kissed her cheek and said nothing because silence is sometimes a gift you give to more than one person at once. The first real fracture, the one that could not be ignored or smoothed over, arrived not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet sigh. A local newspaper ran a profile piece titled Hometown Admiral. Half the article was warm nostalgia, half was careful journalism. The reporter got 2 dates wrong and 1 quote exactly right. The only quote that might have saved us if anyone had been listening. "Leadership means remembering what you serve," I had told the reporter, "not who you impress." My father clipped the article from the newspaper and left it on his workbench in the garage. A coffee ring grew from the corner, staining the paper brown, as if to mark it spoiled and unfit for keeping. When I stopped by the house that afternoon, he said without preamble, "You think you're better than this place?" "No," I replied carefully. "I think I belong to more than one place now." He heard what he wanted to hear. His jaw set in that familiar way. That was the day he began using the word they for people in uniform, as if I were not standing directly in front of him wearing that same uniform. By then, I had seen enough of the world's sorrow to understand that bitterness has a way of recruiting accomplices. A cousin started repeating my father's talking points at family gatherings. A neighbor warned me not to bring politics to the 4th of July parade, by which he meant, do not stand too straight in front of the marching band. Do not be too visible. The men at the diner kept eating their eggs and bacon and calling me soldier on purpose. Even though I had explained the difference between branches of service more than once, it was almost funny until it stopped being funny. The day my mother found a flyer stuck under her windshield wiper, she said nothing at first. The flyer was anonymous and misspelled, suggesting I had received special treatment, advancement I had not earned. She folded it neatly, handed it to me with shaking hands, and said, "Your father has friends who think they're helping him." I put the paper in my pocket and told her it would pass. But I did not believe my own words. Rumors do not pass. They calcify. They become permanent structures in the landscape of a community. So when you ask how a father picks up a telephone and gives his daughter's name to a stranger who will enter it into a system that will print it on official forms, that will be placed in folders, that will ride in government vehicles to a ballroom where a string quartet will stop playing mid-phrase, I answer this. A man does not jump off a cliff in a single day. He walks down a slope so gradual he does not notice the descent, and he calls it standing still. He tells himself he is protecting something important. His pride, his reputation, his version of the truth. He convinces himself that you stole these things from him first, that you took what was rightfully his. By the time the cliff edge arrives, the ground behind him has already crumbled away. There is no path back. I still carry that town inside me. The diner coffee that tastes like it was brewed yesterday and reheated this morning. The river mist. The porch with the loose board that catches your heel if you forget which one it is. I carry the good voices too. The old craftsman who taught me to square a corner properly. The women who pass casserole dishes at church suppers like they are sacraments. My mother's quiet strength. The pastor's firm handshake. The VFW commander's respectful nod. I carry all of them into every room where someone mistakes a uniform for armor against hurt. Hurt finds its way through eventually. So does honor. You cannot always hold both at once, but you can hold steady long enough for one to teach you how to bear the other. That is what I learned before the medals, before the salutes, before any door burst open to rescue me from a public lie. The roots of betrayal are local and personal. The cure must be larger. I did not become an admiral by winning arguments at home. I became one by learning to let storms spend themselves without allowing them to rearrange my sense of purpose. The academy made that lesson concrete. Before sunrise each morning, the courtyard turned into a metronome of feet and breath and shouted orders. I studied until numbers held steady in my head without wavering. I ran until the horizon stopped wobbling. I learned to absorb corrections without losing a single millimeter of height or dignity. Navigation classes taught me the mathematics of acceptable risk. Seamanship taught me the grammar of cause and effect, the way one decision leads inevitably to the next. You make a plan. Then you make a backup plan. Then you learn to trust the person standing next to you enough to throw both plans away when the ocean itself gives you different orders. Sea duty gave me a second spine. You can memorize weather patterns and ocean behavior and still know absolutely nothing until a wall of green water rises like a moving building, and the deck tilts into angles that have no names in any manual. I learned how a ship speaks through the soles of your boots, how the mechanical hum shifts half a note before a bearing begins to overheat, how people will follow your leadership if they see you at 2 a.m. when the coffee is burnt and bitter, when the logbook is smudged with someone's tired handwriting, and the only reward for the work is another hour completed correctly. Senior enlisted sailors were my true professors. They taught me what genuinely matters and what only appears to matter. How to say do it again without anger in your voice. How to say that's enough without apology. I was not promoted because I was a novelty, a woman in a male-dominated field. I was promoted because missions ended the way they were planned on whiteboards, instead of the way anxiety imagines them spiraling at midnight. My first command, I made the mistake every new commanding officer makes. I explained too much. A chief with a voice like gravel on a dirt road cleared his throat during one of my lengthy briefings. "Mom, he said respectfully. They don't need poetry right now. They need a clear picture. He was absolutely right. I started sketching simple diagrams on pocket cards before every operation. Boxes and arrows. Something a boatswain's mate could glance at and know exactly where to put his hands, exactly what came next. We ran drills until muscle memory transformed into unit culture. When circumstances became critical, that culture was what kept the water out and the panic under control. Hard situations came regardless of preparation. We lost a sailor in heavy seas when a freak wave snapped a safety line. I wrote the letter to his mother 3 times before I mailed the 4th version. The first 3 attempts tried to manufacture meaning where there was only devastating absence. The 4th letter told the simple truth and promised nothing more than what memory can actually keep. His division reported for the next watch on schedule. I stood with them during that watch. Not because it was heroic, but because the deck does not care about your personal sorrow. The ocean remembers only competence and preparation. Selection boards for promotion notice results more than eloquent speeches. I moved from ship duty to staff assignments and back again, learning how decisions travel through bureaucracy, how they stall in certain offices, how they quietly die in others. I learned the crucial difference between necessary secrecy and harmful privacy. I studied the temperament of military budgets, the impatience of political calendars. Most importantly, I learned to hear the real question beneath the surface question when a young officer knocked on my door and asked for just 5 minutes of your time. When someone asks, "Ma'am, what should I do?" they often mean, "Will you still believe in me if I choose wrong?" The answer is always steady presence. You keep your door open, your back straight, your promises short enough to actually keep them. The assignment that brought me close to special operations looked glamorous and exciting from a distance. Up close, it was logistics elevated to the level of high-wire performance, timing and nerve that cannot be taught outside the context of real consequences. The first time I briefed a joint task force that included Navy SEALs, I cut my PowerPoint slides in half and doubled the white space. I highlighted only what trained instinct could not already supply. A senior SEAL with a weathered face and knees ruined by hard landings told me afterward, "Ma'am, that'll do." In that particular world, there are few higher compliments. Working with special operations forces required a different kind of professional quiet. The best operators are not loud about being the best. They are meticulous about details that seem trivial until they become life or death. Water, blister tape, fresh batteries, kept promises. They maintain superstitions and detailed checklists in the same mental pocket. They hate wasted words but deeply respect necessary ones. Trust arrived the same way it always does in that community. By being exactly on time for meetings, never just close. By knowing the 3rd contingency option on every map. By admitting what I genuinely did not know before anyone else had to pay the price for my ignorance. I earned sufficient trust that when something far from home needed careful handling, my phone rang at an odd hour. The question was direct and simple. Can you hold this together? The answer was yes. And then it became a detailed plan. And then it became a flight at 3 in the morning. News of my promotions drifted back to my hometown like weather reports from another continent, distant and somewhat unreal. When I pinned on my first star, the pastor wrote a kind note on a plain card and slipped it to my mother after church. When I pinned on the 2nd star, the VFW commander sent a bouquet of flowers so large it looked like an entire parade stuffed into a vase. When I pinned on the 3rd star, my father stared into his coffee mug and said, "There must be a ceiling somewhere." When I pinned on the 4th star, he said nothing at all. His silence communicated everything his words could not. At the diner, he told anyone who would listen that high rank was just politics. And politics, he would add with certainty, was for people who could not swing a hammer or build something real with their hands. I knew better than to argue with a sermon delivered to an audience of eggs and bacon. I kept my own story scrupulously honest because military life refuses to be anything else. I once signed a travel reimbursement voucher in the wrong box and spent 3 days untangling the paperwork, because ethics is not an inspiring slogan. Ethics is boring paperwork completed correctly. I once reprimanded a lieutenant in front of a junior enlisted sailor. Then I apologized to that same lieutenant in front of that same sailor, because dignity cannot be selectively applied. It exists for everyone or it means nothing. I missed a funeral when weather closed an airfield. I wrote a detailed letter to a mother whose patience and grace exceeded my own, by orders of magnitude. These are not the glamorous pages in anyone's career file. They are the truthful ones, the ones that matter when you look back. The closer I advanced to senior leadership, the more deliberately I directed attention away from myself and toward the actual work. Reporters wanted personality and drama. Sailors wanted predictability and fairness. I gave them the second and tried to remain polite to the first. A magazine once requested a photograph of my daily essentials, artfully arranged on a table. I sent them a list instead: navigation charts, reliable pens, a small waterproof flashlight, a secure phone I could not photograph for obvious reasons, and the word duty written on a torn scrap of paper that I kept in my desk drawer. They did not run the piece. That was perfectly fine. Essential should still mean essential. The work carried me across multiple oceans and into conference rooms with carpets thick enough to swallow the sound of your footsteps. I briefed senior officials who mentioned shaking my father's hand when they were younger. I briefed officers young enough to be my children, men who kept their hands flat on the conference table when difficult discussions turned tense. In every room, regardless of carpet or rank, I kept one chair empty in my mind. That chair belonged to the sailors who would live with the consequences of whatever we decided in that air-conditioned room, far from the operational theatre. Keeping that chair visible in my imagination kept my sentences shorter and my decisions sharper. At some point over the years, my father's disapproval transformed from an open wound into a predictable weather pattern. You cannot argue the wind into different behaviour. You dress appropriately for the conditions. You route around the worst of it. You note the direction and continue with your work. Sometimes he answered my phone calls. When he did, we spoke about traffic patterns and utility bills and a neighbour's truck that had finally given up after 20 years. He never asked about the people whose names I carried like prayer beads in my mind. I stopped offering those details. Not because I was being secretive, but because handing him my meaningful work felt like laying a clean flag across a muddy table. My promotion to the highest rank felt nothing like victory and everything like a solemn assignment. The ceremony was deliberately brief. I thought about chiefs and medics and that particular quality of light in the desert just before dawn, when your mouth goes dry and the world holds still before the heat arrives. Then I returned to work. The following months became a dense thicket of classified briefings, budget negotiations, and an inquiry into a procurement irregularity that could have become a genuine scandal if we had allowed it to spiral. We did not allow it. Discipline is a habit long before it ever becomes a headline. So when the invitation arrived for the hometown gala, I accepted. Not because I needed public applause, but because I disliked the notion that pride of place should belong exclusively to the loudest voice in the room. I planned to stand at that podium, accept the ceremonial plaque, speak the names of people who never appear in programs, and remind my hometown that military service is not an exotic stranger who only materializes for parades. I knew my father would attend. I knew he would sit with his jaw set, measuring each of my sentences for evidence of arrogance or self-importance. What I did not know was that he had already located a different audience entirely, one that answers phones on the first ring and writes things down in permanent ink. The night approached like visible weather. You can watch storm clouds building on the horizon while friends insist the outdoor picnic will be fine. I pressed my uniform with care, checked the small silver pin whose post always seems to loosen at the worst possible moment. I tucked my prepared speech into my clutch alongside a photograph of a squad I still dream about once a month. I walked into that ballroom under the flags and chandelier light. I nodded to men who had once promised me their prayers. I took my assigned seat. I knew exactly who I was. I suspected who my father had decided to be. What I did not yet know was precisely how far he had decided to go. Betrayals do not announce themselves with thunder. They arrive disguised as small errands. A cousin casually asks about the date of the gala. A neighbour wonders aloud whether the venue has side entrances or just the main doors. A man at the hardware store mentions the police scanner application he keeps open on his phone and comments, "You hear some interesting things. People don't usually mean anything by it." Until they do. The week before the gala, my mother left a voicemail message. She started the message 3 times, her voice, stopping and restarting before finding her way to the end on the 4th attempt. "Your father has been spending time at Mickey's bar," she said carefully. "They talk big there. Don't be late that night." She did not explicitly say what I already understood. He loved the sound of his own voice most when the room leaned toward him, when people were listening. Pride needs witnesses. Revenge craves them even more. We had dealt with a minor procurement irregularity months earlier before it could transform into headline news. It was nothing substantial. A parts shipment mislabeled on a manifest, a shipping clerk new to the position. A delay in reconciling a budget line because the software update had lagged behind the policy memo. We corrected it the way responsible adults correct mistakes. Forms resubmitted, signatures collected, lessons documented where the next person could learn from them. If you wanted to build a fire from damp kindling, though that irregularity would serve, you would simply need a match and someone eager to strike it. Somewhere during the week before the gala, a phone call was placed to a number whose recordings begin with the words, "This line is monitored for quality assurance." The transcript I would eventually read showed a man stating his full name, then quickly correcting himself to use only initials, as if trying to outrun his own impulse toward honesty. He claimed I had misused access to classified computer systems. He used technical terminology he had clearly heard somewhere but could not define if pressed. He repeated the phrase "stolen documents" twice, the way an amateur actor repeats a punchline that failed to land the first time. He insisted he wanted to remain anonymous for family reasons. He sounded pleased with himself for mastering that particular phrase. He was careful not to breathe too loudly into the phone. What he did not know, or perhaps did not care about, was that the agents listening to such calls make their living separating genuine heat from theatrical smoke. I did not learn about that phone call until much later. What I did know, what I could feel in my bones, was this. My father had developed a dangerous talent for getting things almost correct, almost the right phrase, almost the right posture, almost the right facts. If you do not particularly care about the difference between almost and actually, you can carry yourself through a room and out the door with a stolen prize. If you do care, almost lands with a thud you feel in your teeth. On Tuesday that week, he told a neighbor that even admirals must answer to the law. He was not technically wrong. On Wednesday, he told someone else that classified was just another word for covered up. He was not remotely right. On Thursday, he was overheard telling his barber that powerful people only fall properly if you choose the right public moment. He believed that qualified as wisdom. On Friday, he bought a new necktie. The morning of the gala, a patrol car idled outside Mickey's bar for 20 minutes while an officer went inside for coffee and conversation. Later, that same officer would write in his official report that a concerned citizen had visited the police station with documentation he believed demonstrated mishandling of federal records. The citizen had specifically requested discretion until the appropriate time. The documentation turned out to be a printed opinion column from a political blog, stapled to a blurry screenshot of a procurement ledger. The blog specialized in mistaking speculation for investigative reporting. I have seen handwritten orders scribbled on the backs of matchbooks carry more legal weight. The officer passed the packet upward through the chain of command because packets travel upward regardless of their actual contents. That is the nature of bureaucratic systems. Somewhere above that officer, someone who feared public embarrassment more than they valued accuracy made a phone call to a judge. The wording was deliberately careful. A warrant was issued that hedged all its bets. Bring her in. Hold her briefly. Ask questions in a room without an audience present. The specific venue was not designated. The timing was left intentionally flexible. The discretion that should have guided every aspect of this process fell instead to the one person who wanted none of it. The person who wanted maximum spectacle. In the late afternoon before the gala, I stood alone in a hotel room 3 blocks from the ballroom. I checked my uniform again, smoothing a wrinkle that no one else would notice. I straightened a ribbon that refused to stay perfectly aligned. I slid the folded speech into my clutch and tucked the old photograph behind it. My phone vibrated with an incoming message from a retired chief I had served with years ago. No words accompanied it, just a photograph of a horizon line over dark water. The kind of sky that communicates dawn is arriving exactly on schedule, regardless of human drama. I took one measured breath. Then I walked toward my appointment with public humiliation. The hotel lobby smelled faintly of industrial lemon cleaner and old cigarette smoke that no amount of renovation could completely erase. Easels with printed posters pointed the way like polite ushers. Banquet Hall East. Sponsors reception. Veterans exhibit. In the corridor leading to the ballroom, a teenager in an oversized jacket collected tickets and looked genuinely grateful to be trusted with something that mattered. I dropped my ticket into the decorated box. He grinned at the formal weight of the cardstock paper, as if it proved that money and tradition was still real in the world. When I stepped through those double doors, the room rose to its feet. I nodded the way you nod, when applause belongs less to you personally than to the idea you represent. The uniform, the rank, the promise of service. I took my assigned seat between two flags. I felt the small vibration in the floor that hotels produce when kitchen staff are working at full capacity. I set my clutch beside the bread plate and prepared myself for whatever was coming. My father looked good that evening. He has the kind of face that photographs well, that earns him the benefit of doubt in most rooms. He had chosen a blue necktie with a diagonal stripe pattern that suggested restraint and seriousness to anyone who does not know how to read the knives hidden in his gestures. He shook hands as if friction were a competitive sport. He made small blades of his compliments, each one sharp enough to draw a thin line of blood. "You've held up remarkably well," he told a woman I had served with overseas. Then he added, "For your age." He took a seat that positioned him perfectly within my sightline when I would eventually stand at the podium. The event committee had not arranged this deliberately. He would believe they had. He always believed gravity specifically chose him, that the universe bent in his direction. If you have never watched someone carefully construct a stage for his own performance, understand this: he will pay meticulous attention to the doors. He will calculate the distance from his chair to the main aisle. He will verify the sight line to the microphone. He will angle his body toward the exact place where light falls to gild his jawline. He is not vain in the traditional sense. He is strategic. During the sponsor's brief opening remarks, my father kept one hand resting on the white tablecloth and the other near his jacket pocket, as if fabric might whisper to him when his precise moment arrived. I imagine the phone there was set to vibrate. I imagine the text message he waited for read something simple like "now" or "go." The arrest came not because the facts required it, but because one man wanted a public setting, an audience for his righteousness. A quieter, more thoughtful officer would have found me backstage before the program began and politely asked me to step outside for a moment. A braver officer would have placed a phone call to the agency with actual jurisdiction and asked an impolite but necessary question about whether this arrest was legitimate. The officers who walked through those ballroom doors that night were neither quiet nor brave. They were ordinary men handed an extraordinary assignment that did not fit them properly. To compensate for their discomfort, they made the moment larger than it needed to be. The words treason and arrest did most of the work for them. They did not see what I saw clearly: the fragility in their own hands, the tremor of a small town using the law as a mirror to show itself righteous. My father delivered his prepared line as if it had been written specifically for him by a Hollywood screenwriter. "I'm the one who reported you." He visibly enjoyed the jolt his words sent through the room, the way heads at the nearest tables swiveled toward him as if he had suddenly become the master of ceremonies. He mistook their shock for admiration. He confused their fear with respect. I watched him accept the moment like a trophy he had earned. He lifted his glass with deliberate slowness. He waited for eyes to confirm that he had done something brave, something necessary. He did not look at my mother. She had chosen a seat at a different table under the polite pretense of helping a friend manage place cards. She held her napkin in both hands like a small white flag of surrender. Even in the midst of that orchestrated humiliation, I had mental space for a quiet inventory. I counted the exits. I counted my own breaths. I counted the beats between when a door opens and a human brain decides what the new shape in the doorway actually means. I felt the invisible line between malicious gossip and legal action snap tight. I understood it would not hold much longer. The officers' grips on my arms were firm without being cruel. The crowd's noise rose like a wave and then fell as if the room itself possessed lungs. A retired chief I knew from a previous assignment took a half step forward, then forced himself to stay put. A young man carrying a serving tray made a split-second decision not to cut across the aisle after all. Somewhere far behind the stage, a kitchen continued its work. The clatter of pots and pans continued, proof that the world goes on making soups and sauces while the rest of us perform our moral theatre. When the officers turned me toward the doors, my father's voice followed, buoyant and sure of itself. "Look at her," he said to the nearest donor, to the air itself, to the version of himself he most admired in his own mind. Even now she thinks the rules don't apply. He loved that phrase, "even now," as if time itself belonged to him, as if he controlled the narrative of this moment. I did not look back. Inside my chest, the internal metronome I carry for genuine emergencies began its familiar tick. I could not yet hear the boots. But I knew the musical measure. I knew the downbeat approaching from somewhere outside this room. The lie had made its dramatic entrance on schedule. Truth was waiting just outside, precisely on time, ready to be announced. The right-hand door opened first. Then the left door swung wide. Foyer lights spilled across the threshold in a bright bar that made the ballroom look exactly like what it was. A stage where people had been performing their assumptions about right and wrong. The officers holding my elbows went rigid, not because they consciously recognized the silhouettes filling the doorway, but because their bodies remembered something their conscious minds had not yet processed. Training. Authority. The presence of people who do not ask for permission. The sound reached us half a beat later. The measured cadence of military boots on marble, crisp enough to slice through crystal and frightened chatter. A line formed in the doorway. Not rushed, not theatrical, simply inevitable. The first man through wore nothing flashy at all. A field grey suit professionally tailored. Clean haircut. Eyes like the deep, quiet part of the ocean where pressure and darkness make everything simple. He did not need to hold a badge in his hand. Authority travelled in the air ahead of him like an advanced scout. Behind him came the team, sleeves rolled to identical lengths, gear worn and positioned with precision. Not a single strap out of place. Faces held impassive the way serious discipline keeps them. Professional, calm, utterly certain. The murmur in the ballroom fell through 2 octaves and then stopped altogether. Someone's phone camera flashed once and went dark. The teenager at the ticket box in the hallway leaned in to see what was happening. A woman who had spent 6 months planning centerpieces placed both palms flat on her tablecloth to steady the small universe she had created. The man in grey stepped deliberately to one side, clearing the doorway like a valve opening. The SEAL commander I knew as well as I know the scar under my hairline stepped through that opening and found me with his eyes before he found me with his measured footsteps. He halted exactly 10 paces from the officers holding my arms, his spine aligned perfectly under the American flag hanging from the stage. When he spoke, his voice did not carry because he shouted. It carried because every word was true. "Admiral," he said clearly, "4-star officer, we are here." He came to attention with the precision the word attention possessed when men built warships from trees, and honor meant something you could die defending. Behind him, a dozen chests rose and fell in perfect unison. The room did not applaud. The room remembered what it had temporarily forgotten about itself. The officers at my sides shifted their weight uncomfortably. Their grips loosened slightly. They looked at the commander, then at me, then at each other with the expression men wear when the floor plan of reality has changed without their consent. The man in grey flicked a single glance at the officer's hands on my arms. It was not a warning. It was a polite request to accelerate the timeline. "Gentlemen," he said in a voice that carried the weight of every legal authority that matters, "we'll assume custody of this situation from here." He did not reach for paperwork immediately. First, he established clarity. "There has been a fundamental misunderstanding of jurisdiction," he said. His tone was almost gentle, almost regretful about the mistake that was about to be corrected. The taller officer beside me found his voice, though it came out uncertain. "We have a warrant." The man in grey nodded with careful respect. "You have a warrant authorizing you to ask questions. You do not have a case." He held up a black leather folder, turned it so the embossed government seal caught the chandelier light, and allowed the room to read what needed reading without him reading it aloud. The effect on the atmosphere was chemical. The air itself changed composition. He addressed me then. There was no elaborate ceremony, only the courtesy due between people who have held the same difficult ground at different moments in history. "Ma'am," he said. That single word contained everything that needed to be communicated. I gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. The SEAL commander took half a step forward and lifted his chin toward the 2 officers. "You can release the Admiral," he said. "Not hard, not soft." He made it sound like he was offering them a dignified way to live with this night, when they woke up tomorrow morning and remembered what they had done. The officers released my arms simultaneously, not because they had been directly ordered, but because they understood what their hands were saying in that moment and decided they preferred different words. A man in a dark suit who had been pretending to be invisible near the stage suddenly found the microphone. He tried to announce that the program would resume shortly. He got out the first syllable of program before a look from the man in grey convinced him that language could wait its turn. The commander spoke again, lower now. His words were meant only for the officers and for me. "This will be brief," he said. He meant the immediate next part. He did not mean the larger story that had brought us all to this moment. The leather folder opened on the table nearest to us. The first page visible on top was not an accusation. It was an authorization. You could tell immediately by the signatures. Straight lines of ink from people whose names only appear in documents when history wants to remember what was decided. The language was spare and precise, lawful tasking. Compartmented oversight, temporary access to computer systems governed by classification levels most people only encounter in novels. The dates aligned perfectly. The authorization codes matched. The mission parameters were described in exactly 5 words that communicated enough to the few people who needed to know, and absolutely nothing to everyone else. The document did not clear me of wrongdoing because clearance was unnecessary. It simply affirmed that what I had done was exactly what I had been asked to do by the United States government. The warrant had claimed I offended the law. The irony would have been genuinely funny in a different room. The taller officer read quickly at first, then slower as comprehension arrived. His ears coloured red, as if the blood that had rushed to his face in triumph was now making its embarrassed way back to humility. We were told he began. The man in grey did not let him finish a sentence that would become a bullet point for someone's career review board. "I know what you were told," he said, still kind. He tapped the signature that mattered most. "This is what's actually true." The shorter officer swallowed hard. Are we, he could not decide whether to say in trouble or released or sorry. So he said nothing at all. The commander spared them both from having to answer and address the room, because someone needed to speak the simple truth out loud. "There is no treason here," he said. A sound moved across the tables like wind through a wheat field. Relief. Confusion. The peculiar shame of having believed a lie. My father had not planned for this specific scenario. He had planned for the handcuffs, for the collective gasp, for the crooked line of people leaning toward him for details and explanation. He had planned for the moment when he could deliver the final sentence of the story he had rehearsed in front of his bathroom mirror. "Even our kind must answer to something larger," he had probably intended to say. Something that would make him sound philosophical and principled. He had not planned for men whose entire answer to that question was a lifetime of actually showing up. He had not planned for official documents that do not bend for private resentments. He had not planned for the way a single word, spoken with genuine authority, can completely redraw the map of a night. He kept his glass in his hand because he genuinely did not know what else to do with it. The ice had melted down to a single clouded cube. He looked older by the time that ice cracked and made the remaining liquid watery and dilute. He still had his jaw, that famous jawline he was so proud of. But his jaw no longer had him. The man in grey closed the folder, not with flourish, with finality. "If anyone requires a formal written statement, we'll provide it outside this venue after the Admiral gets some air," he said. Then he turned to the 2 officers. "You'll walk with us. You'll want to hear what you were not told by the person who made that initial complaint." They nodded, visibly relieved to have a next step that looked like legitimate work instead of public theatre. The commander looked at me, not for permission, but for timing. I let one more beat pass, the beat that allows a crowd to settle into the truth it has just learned. The beat that lets understanding seep into bones. Then I took one deliberate step forward, not toward the door and escape. Toward the podium. No one stopped me. I did not reach for the microphone. I did not need electronic amplification for 10 words. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said clearly, "we will honor the fallen first." I meant it with every fiber of my being. The printed agenda for the evening had always begun with the names we carry. The ones no mission brings back, the ones who paid with everything. I placed my hand on the polished wood of the podium and bowed my head. Not for show, not for performance. 100 chairs rustled. 100 bodies remembered they knew how to be appropriately solemn for the right reasons. The man in grey stood at ease. The commander closed his eyes in respect. In the sudden silence, the teenager in the corridor straightened his oversized jacket as if he had just understood something important about dignity. When I lifted my head, I met my father's eyes across the distance between us. He tried to hold his old look, the one that said he still controlled the frame, still controlled the narrative. but it faltered visibly. For just a second, naked as an unpainted wall, he looked like a man who had misread a label and served the wrong dish to people he desperately wanted to impress. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He put his glass down with both hands as if it had suddenly become heavy. My mother, seated at her distant table, breathed out audibly. She pressed her napkin flat against the tablecloth with her palms. The way you smooth a bedsheet after a night of fever has finally broken. We walked out together, not in a parade, not in retreat. The man in grey set the measured pace. The two officers walked to either side of him. The SEAL team formed a quiet geometry around all of us that felt less like protection than like respect. In the corridor outside, the teenager whispered, "Ma'am," as we passed. I said thank you, because courtesy restores what spectacle breaks into pieces. Outside the building, the air carried that generic hotel smell of landscaping mulch and chlorine from an indoor pool and car exhaust. Beyond all that, underneath it was the real air. Night air weighted with humidity. The kind that carries distant sounds. A train 2 miles away. A dog that barks once and then decides to save its comment for morning. At the curb, a black SUV idled with its lights off. Someone opened the rear door without making it a theatrical gesture. Before I climbed in, the commander touched 2 fingers to his temple in the smallest possible salute. The kind you give when you have earned the right to eliminate all flourish from the gesture. "Ma'am," he said formally, "with your permission, we'll brief these officers properly." Away from all this, I said, "Do it." The man in grey added quietly, "We'll also address the original source of this complaint. He did not say your father. He did not need to. Process would handle it the way process always does. Late, slow, thorough. Sure." Back inside the building, the evening program would rearrange itself somehow. A string quartet would find its way back to the correct musical measure. A committee chair would explain what could be explained to confused donors. People would begin inventing a new story they could tell themselves about what they had witnessed. A story that made them seem brave or at least neutral. That distributed fault widely and made fear something communal rather than personal. That is human nature. I understand it. Out here under a sky that had finally darkened enough to be honest about itself, I took one breath of air that contained nothing except oxygen and the faint sweetness of a municipal flower bed. I let my shoulders settle into their natural position. The truth had walked into a room and stood up straight. The lie had nowhere left to sit. They briefed the 2 officers in a glass-walled conference room off the hotel lobby while I waited outside in a small side garden. The kind of token rectangle of shrubs and brick pavers that exists mostly to give smokers a designated place to stand. A small fountain made the sound of coins falling into a glass jar. Over the hedge, the band restarted playing. Cautious phrases at first, as if music were a nervous animal being coaxed back out of a carrier after a trauma. I stood with my back to the ivy and listened to the night. Night has a particular way of separating the noise people manufacture from the truths they refuse to say out loud. I could have left then. Slipped into that idling SUV, been driven to where the briefing would be professionally clean and the paperwork even cleaner. But instead I waited. It is not strategic thinking to flee from the conversation that makes all the others finally make sense. He came out alone, not because he wanted privacy necessarily, but because he could not bear the presence of witnesses at the moment when the narrative turned sharply, and did not carry him along with it. He stopped 3 paces away from me, still standing in the yellow doorway light, which lent him a colour no honest sky provides. For a long second we did not speak. We had rehearsed this particular silence for years. We were both fluent in it. He adjusted his necktie the way men adjust an oath they no longer intend to keep. "You humiliated me," he said finally, choosing the only angle that could possibly render him the injured party in this scenario. I let the words pass like weather. "You humiliated yourself," I replied simply. The fountain continued counting quarters into its jar. Behind him, a city bus sighed at the curb and moved on into the night. "They told me you were corrupt," he said. I heard the coward's comfort in that passive voice construction. "Who told you?" I asked. He gave me a list of pronouns instead of names. People. Folks. A guy who knows a veteran at the bar. Someone who hears things. He put that last one down like a trump card. "A veteran," he repeated, as if that word itself could absolve him of not knowing what he was actually talking about. "You didn't ask me directly," I said. He lifted his chin defensively. "You would have lied," he shot back quickly with that old quickness. he had always prized in himself. "I have never lied to you," I said. "I meant the kind of lie that plasters over structural rot and pretends the foundation is still sound." "You keep secrets," he said, as if the distinction were invisible to him. "I keep faith," I answered, "with the mission, with the people under my command, with the country you taught me to pledge allegiance to before you taught me how to drive a car." He flinched in the smallest way. The way a body flinches when a muscle remembers work it has not performed in years. He looked at the shrubs, at the brick pavers, anywhere except directly at my face. "You make me feel small," he said quietly. There it was. The part he never said clearly in daylight. "No," I said. "I make you visible to yourself. There's a difference." He swallowed hard. "A father is supposed to lead," he said, as if quoting something from a calendar of inspirational phrases. "Then lead," I said simply. "Lead yourself toward the truth. It's not far from where you're standing." He searched my face for mockery and found none. "I am not cruel by nature. I do not collect trophies from other people's pain, not even in private." He set his hands on his hips, elbows wide, adopting the posture of a man trying to rediscover his own outline in space. "You talk like you're delivering a sermon," he said, meaning to belittle the observation. "A sermon saved you tonight," I said softly. Because whether or not he understood it, the words in that leather folder were a kind of secular absolution. "They didn't come for me because I'm special," I added. "They came because the truth is stubborn. That's the only magic here. That's all this is." He frowned at the word stubborn. "He thinks that word belongs exclusively to him." "You made me into the villain," he muttered. "You volunteered for the role?" I said. "They asked for a statement," he snapped back. "You offered them a performance," I replied. He looked up sharply, stung by the accuracy. "I wanted you to learn something important," he said. I almost laughed. "Not unkindly." "Learn what?" I asked gently. He groped for an answer, then assembled a pile of half-formed concepts. Humility, consequences, respect. "Respect for whom?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle. "For me," he said. Then he stood there in that yellow doorway light and could not say no, could not say yes, and chose instead the familiar refuge of anger. "You're not better than me," he said. "No," I agreed. "I'm not better than you. But I am better than the man you pretended to be tonight." For a long beat, he just breathed. The air went in rough. "All my life," he said slowly, "I built a name, a reputation. You took it and made it yours instead." "No," I said again. It was astonishing how many wrong doors a single small word could close. "I took my own life and made it honorable. The name is still yours. It will still be yours tomorrow when I'm gone. What do you want it to mean?" He looked down at his shoes. The posture of a boy arrived in his body like a shadow that had been standing off stage, waiting for its cue in this scene. "I didn't know about all that," he said, gesturing vaguely back toward the hotel. "The men in suits. The folder with all those signatures." "That's correct," I said. "You didn't know. You actively preferred not knowing. You can fix that now. Start there." He lifted his eyes to mine. There was water in them. Not quite tears, but an admission that tears exist somewhere in his body. "What do you want from me?" he asked. It was the first genuinely honest question he had asked me in a decade. "Accountability," I said. He flinched again at the bureaucratic ugliness of the word. "Say what you actually did," I continued. "To the people you told your story to the men who walked through those ballroom doors, to Mom." At that last word, he blinked rapidly. Not because he had forgotten her existence, but because he had miscalculated how much she had already carried tonight on his behalf. "She knew?" he asked. The child in his voice was almost unbearable to hear. "She knows you," I said quietly. "She knows you'll choose a stage over a kitchen table if someone offers you a microphone." He took a half step forward, then stopped himself. "And you?" he asked. "What do you want from me personally?" I thought about saying nothing, about letting the question hang there like a sign at a crossroads, letting him choose his own direction. He would probably choose whichever road allowed him to pretend he had taken the harder path. But I am not a ghost in this family. I am a daughter who happens to carry a different set of tools. "I want a father," I said clearly. The kind who stands in the back of a room and nods with genuine pride. The kind who tells his barber the truth even when there's nobody there to applaud him for it. He folded then. Not in defeat exactly, but in a kind of structural adjustment. His shoulders lowered. The bones of his face moved toward their original, honest positions. "I don't know if I can do that," he said in a voice I recognized from a long time ago, before everything got complicated. "Try," I said. That's heavy enough work for today. The door opened behind him. My mother stood there, her hair slightly dishevelled, still holding that napkin in one hand as if long habit had forgotten to return it to the table. She looked at him, then at me, taking in the geometry of our positions. "It's cold out here," she said, meaning everything. "Come inside." He glanced at her, then at me, then at the blank space between us where so many unsaid things had kept their long vigil. "I'll talk to them," he said. I knew he meant the donors inside. The men at the barber shop. The guys at Mickey's bar. The men who build their own identities from other men's stories. "Good," I said. "Use short sentences. Use your own words. Tell them what you did, not what you thought you were doing." We walked back inside together, not arm in arm, not separated by the width of the hallway, a geometry that would suffice for now. In the lobby, the man in grey waited with the two officers, who now looked profoundly relieved to be back in a world of clear procedure instead of public spectacle. "We'll need formal statements tomorrow," the man said to both my father and me. My father nodded. "You'll have mine." His voice carried the plainness that dignity lends to a sentence when pride finally stops renting it a costume. The commander gave me a small, almost invisible look that both asked a question and answered it simultaneously. "We're square for tonight," I said. "Yes, ma'am," he replied. Then he disappeared into an elevator with his team, leaving behind only the faint smell of a hallway cleaned recently enough to be respectable. At the ballroom doors, my father stopped walking. The quartet had found its courage again. The committee chair held the printed program like a man trying to reconcile hope with reality. "You don't have to go back in there," I told him. "I do," he said. For once, I believed he had guessed correctly about the right thing. He stepped through the doors before I did and walked directly to his original table. He remained standing. The nearest faces braced themselves for another performance, for more drama. Instead, he gave them a sentence with no cleverness in it at all. "I was wrong," he said clearly. Those 3 words travelled farther than any elaborate toast ever could. A small sound moved through the room. The particular sound humans make when they recognize. They are still capable of recognizing something true. He looked at me across that space. I nodded once. It was not forgiveness, not yet. It was the bridge that forgiveness would eventually use when it was ready to cross. Later, when the night had thinned out and the committee had exhausted its institutional starch, and the last photograph had found its flash, I stood alone on the hotel's loading dock. The cool air made every breath feel earned and worth taking. The sky over the river had the dull color of tin. Somewhere in the distance, a train sent one long note across the dark like a promise held at arm's length. I thought about the younger women who would see tonight's events retold poorly, and incompletely in the morning, but would try anyway to follow their own path. I thought about a town that might gradually learn to tell better stories about itself. I thought about my father inside that ballroom, seated now, his napkin in his lap like a truce he might actually keep. I let the air go out slowly and felt my shoulders unlock. Reckoning is not the end of anything. It is the first honest page. Memorial Day arrived on a Monday morning that smelled like cut grass and charcoal smoke. The kind of morning when American flags look heavier than usual because they are bearing the weight of names. The town had painted the street curbs 2 days earlier. The white lines were still crisp and clean. At the edge of the town square, veterans in mismatched caps adjusted their jackets with careful hands. A Boy Scout troop practiced standing still. The pastor held his program binder the way you hold a small bird that trusts you not to squeeze. I arrived without any entourage and took a place near the back of the gathering, under a tree that had outlived 3 police chiefs and a mayor. I do not like elevated stages for grief. The ground itself does that job better. He was already there, early in a way he never used to be. My father wore a suit that had witnessed more weddings than funerals and a necktie the colour of church carpet. He noticed me the way a man notices weather, with respect, without surprise. He did not wave. He did something smaller and infinitely more difficult. He held my gaze directly and nodded once. Not to claim me as his, but to acknowledge me as myself. My mother stood in the space between us. For the first time in a very long time, it felt like she did not have to physically hold us up to prevent us from falling into each other's shadows. The memorial service began without flourish. A high school senior with a trumpet stepped forward and made the instrument sound older and wiser than he was. A woman from the Gold Star Families organization read 7 names aloud. stopping twice to steady her voice. Those pauses communicated more than perfect fluency ever could have. The VFW commander I had always respected spoke like a man watering a garden, slowly, carefully, attending to what genuinely matters. He called the town to remember that we are more than the sum of our commercial transactions. That our collective reputation is not just the rhythm of gossip, but a ledger written in service and sacrifice. People shifted in their folding chairs. Silence took a seat among us. When the moment arrived for laying the memorial wreath, the committee chair cleared his throat and looked down at his printed program as if consulting a map. "We invite Admiral," he began cautiously, then said my full name the way it is meant to be said in public. Plainly, without apology or italics. I walked forward, but only as far as the first row of chairs. Then I stopped. "Today the wreath belongs to the families," I said clearly. "Not to me." The woman who had read the names stood and accepted the wreath's ribbon with both hands. No camera tried to make the moment about anything else. The town allowed the moment to belong to who it should. It would have been enough. A good ending. But life had written a second measure for this particular day. The VFW commander raised his chin toward the assembled crowd. "Before we close," he said, "a citizen has asked to speak briefly. People do not usually ask to speak at memorial services unless they want to pick a fight with the calendar, unless they have an agenda." But my father stepped forward, and the crowd understood immediately that the fight was entirely with himself. He did not take the microphone from the commander's hand. He let the commander continue holding it the way a sponsor holds a safety rope. "My name is," he began, then said his full name out loud as if it weighed exactly what it should. "I made a serious mistake," he said next. The second sentence emerged cleaner than the first. I mistook attention for truth. "I told a story I wanted to be true because it made me feel like a man who sees through deception. I hurt my daughter. I disrespected the people who serve this country. I did it in public, so I will say this in public. I was completely wrong. No theatrical flourishes. No embroidered wisdom attempting to make the moment about redemption. Just the simple carpentry of sentences built square and honest." The sound that moved across the folding chairs was not applause. It was a collective exhale that said this town still knew how to breathe together when it mattered. He turned toward me without transforming the moment into a performance. "I'm going to spend real time learning what I didn't bother to know before," he said. "If you see me at Mickey's bar and I start talking nonsense, tell me to stop. If you hear me at the barber shop and I begin a sentence with 'I heard somewhere,' tell me I was told wrong. I'll practice doing better." The commander closed the microphone. The pastor placed a hand on my father's shoulder. A gesture that communicated repentance can be ordinary, and that is precisely when it lasts. After the service concluded, people did what people naturally do. They formed a line without admitting it was a line. Some wanted to shake my hand. Some wanted to touch my father's elbow. Some wanted simply to stand nearby until their breathing matched the rhythm of the town again. A boy in a scout uniform looked up at me with serious eyes. "Is it hard to stand still when people say things about you that aren't true?" he asked. I told him the truth. "Yes. And it's even harder to move well afterward if you haven't practiced standing still first." He nodded as if he could feel the lesson fold up small enough to fit in his pocket next to a merit badge card. My mother invited both of us to the house for lunch. The table held potato salad and sliced ham and a lemon cake with a single depression in the middle that somehow made it more trustworthy. We ate without ceremony. Halfway through a second cup of coffee, my father reached into a kitchen drawer and produced a small wooden box I had not seen in years. Inside lay the scuffed class ring he used to wear when he needed to feel like someone who had once finished something important. He set it on the table between us. "I was proud of this," he said quietly. "I let it do too much work for me." He started to slide it toward me, then stopped and laughed at himself. "Old habit," he said, sliding it back to his side of the table. "No," I said. "Keep it. Let it do the right kind of work now. We did not fix everything that afternoon. That is not how moral mathematics actually works. You do not balance decades of a ledger in a single column of addition. You start writing entries in the correct book." He began asking questions, the kind that fit into sentences that ordinary people can live with. How does a mission become officially yours? Who signs the authorizations? Who monitors compliance? How do you keep faith with people who can never know the operational details? I answered using the same kind of accessible sentences. I told him how silence is not a lie when it protects living people. I told him how humility travels better and farther than certainty. I told him how military service is not a costume you put on for parades. It is a promise you renew every single time you attempted to make yourself the main character. When I left that afternoon, the light had turned the river to dull tin again. A breeze off the water lifted the corner of the porch flag. The sound was less a flap than a whisper. He walked me to the porch steps and stopped on the second one, exactly where he used to stand when I left for school decades ago. "I'll be at the next ceremony," he said. "In the back row where good fathers stand." "Good," I said. "Bring your own folding chair." He smiled. The smile did not try to sell anything. On the drive back to base, I thought about all the people who will never receive this particular kind of ending. The daughters whose fathers never learn the crucial difference between being right and becoming good. The mothers who hold napkins like white flags forever. The families fractured by pride that calcifies into permanent separation. I thought about the men in grey suits whose life's work is pulling truth through bureaucratic systems like thread through cloth, working patiently until the correct pattern finally appears. The commanders who speak just enough words, never more than necessary. The teenagers who straighten their jackets when the moment asks for their small portion of bravery. I thought about the young women who will watch a short video clip of this weekend, stripped of all its context, edited down to dramatic moments. But perhaps they will find inside even that clumsy edit a reason to keep their back straight and their purposes clear. You do not get to choose your entire audience in life, but you absolutely get to choose your voice. If you have carried a betrayal through your life the way a soldier carries weight, a quiet, grinding burden that never quite goes away, please know you are not alone in that burden. If you have been the person who told a loud story to avoid hearing a quiet one that asked you to change, you can still set the microphone down. You can still choose differently. Start small. Make one correction where you once made a claim. Stand in the back of a room. Nod with genuine respect when someone else speaks truth you were not ready to carry yourself. And if this story gave you a measure of steadiness, something solid to stand on, please share it with someone who could use a more stable afternoon. Stories travel farther and do more good when they lay down burdens instead of collecting them. Thank you for listening, for remembering, for standing with those who serve and those who wait.